Alright, so we're going to talk about factoring trinomials here, and this is using decomposition. I recommend that you refer to your handout for the process that's attached to your study guide as you work through these examples. So I'm starting out with this one, x squared plus 7x plus 10. So what I need to do is to first of all take my leading coefficient, which is the coefficient of the x squared term, and multiply it by my constant, or my term over here, without a variable. Well, there's no coefficient written here, so it's understood to be a 1. So 1 times my constant is 1 times 10. So 1 times 10, of course, is 10. Okay? So that's the first step done. My second step now is to find out the factors of 10, or the numbers that multiply to give me 10. So the first possibility would be the numbers 1 and 10. Don't forget about your negatives. You could also use negative 1 and negative 10 because a negative 1 times a negative 10 does give you a positive 10. And then 2 and 5 also go into 10, so we could use as well negative 2 and negative 5. So I've got 4 pairs of numbers here. So now the next step tells me to choose the pair of numbers that add together to give me the coefficient on the middle term here, and the middle term being this one here. So I need to find the two numbers that add up to give me the 7. So let's look at my pairs of numbers. So 1 and 10, they add up to give me 11. So it's not that pair. This pair doesn't work. Negative 1 and negative 10, well, that would be negative 11. That's no good. 2 and 5, that adds up to 7 though. So it looks like the numbers that we're going to need are 2 and 5. Of course, negative 2 and negative 5 add to negative 7, so they don't work. So now, what I'm going to do is take this middle term, the 7x, and split it into two pieces. So instead of writing it as 7x, I'm actually going to write it as 2x plus 5x, which is a sum of these two numbers that I just found here. Okay? So, instead of having now a trinomial with 3 terms, this middle term gets split into 2, which will end up giving me 4 terms. So this original becomes, leave my x squared, my 7x is written like this instead, so plus 2x plus 5x, and then plus 10. So now, as you can see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Okay? Now, my next step is to group these into pairs. So I just kind of underline them like this so I can visualize each pair of terms. So my first pair of terms is x squared and 2x. So I need to factor out a common factor here between x squared and 2x. Well, 1 and 2, the common factor would be 1. And x squared and x, my common factor would be x. So my common factor for the first two terms would be 1x, or just x. So we'll just write it as x. Now, factor with a GCF, so we need to find out what goes in here. Well, x times what gives me x squared? Well, x times x, of course. I've got a plus sign here, so x times what gives me a positive 2x? Well, x times positive 2. So as you can see, x squared plus 2x factors into x times x plus 2. Now, my second pair of terms here, I've got a common factor of 5 going into both of these terms because I've got a 5 and a 10. So I'm going to add my 5. Notice that this one doesn't have an x in the common factor. That's because this term here doesn't have an x. So open up my brackets again. What goes in here? 5 times what gives me 5x? 5 times x. And then 5 times what gives me positive 10? A positive 2. Okay, so now we've really got two terms here. This is my first term, x times x plus 2, and this is my next term, which is 5 times x plus 2. what I hope that you notice here is that they both have this x plus 2 factor. So since both terms have the same factor, it's a common factor. So I can factor out that common factor, pretty similar to how we did the common factors here. So what I'm going to do is take that common bracket, write it out in front, so the common bracket is x plus 2, and then when I take this term here, x times x plus 2, if I cover up the x plus 2, I'm left with x. Okay? Now when I go over here to this term and I cover up the common factor, the x plus 2, I'm left with the plus 5. So the term that goes in the other bracket here is going to be x plus 5. So my final answer here is x plus 2 times x plus 5. All right, let's do another example. And we're going to use the same process again. So let's do x squared plus 5x plus 6. So my first thing to do is to multiply my leading coefficient by my constant. So this is a 1 times a 6. Actually, that's supposed to be a negative 6 here. So 1 times my negative 6. Well, 1 times negative 6 is negative 6, right? So now I need to find out what multiplies to give me negative 6. Alright, so since it's a negative, I know that at least one term in every pair must be negative, right? So negative 6 could be negative 1 times positive 6. It could be 1 times negative 6. It could be negative 2 times 3, or 2 times negative 3. Okay? Now, I need to take the pair of numbers here that add up to give me this 5 right here. Well, negative 1 plus 6 actually does give me 5. So this is my pair of numbers right here, negative 1 and 6. So what I'm going to do, just like last time, we're going to take that middle term and we're going to split it into two pieces. So I'm just going to take this guy and split it up into negative 1x plus 6x. So that's going to give me x squared minus x, instead of writing 1x here, I'm just writing x, plus 6x minus 6. Alright, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms here now, so I'm going to group the first two terms together, and then the last two terms together. I've got to factor out a common factor, so x squared and x have a common factor of x. X times what gives me x squared? Of course, that's x. Now, x times what gives me negative x? Right, negative 1. All right, over here, I've got 6x with a negative 6, so it looks like I've got a 6 in common right here. So I can take out a 6. 6 times what gives me positive 6x? Well, x. And 6 times what gives me a negative 6? Negative 1. Okay, now we've got the common bracket here. X minus 1 is the common bracket. So I'm going to write down that common bracket first. And then when I cover up the common bracket, I'm going to have x right here plus 6 right there. So my other bracket is x plus 6. Okay? So at this point you might be asking, well, when I pick my numbers here, negative 1 and 6, or whatever the two numbers they are, do I always have to put them in the same order? And the answer is no. But what I warn you about is if you were to switch the order of these two numbers right here, then instead of the negative number being the second term, it actually ends up being the third term. And when your third term is negative, it ends up being a little bit uglier to deal with. So what I'm going to do is another example now where my third term has to be negative so that you can see what happens. But if you have one positive and one negative, I always recommend putting the negative as the second term instead of the third term. But of course, if the two numbers that you pick are both negative, then you can't really do anything about that. You can't avoid having a third term being negative. So this example has that exact situation happen, and I'll show you how to deal with that. So this is x squared minus 6x plus 8. So again, I'm going to take the first term, the leading coefficient, multiply it by the last term here. 1 times 8 gives me 8. What multiplies to give me 8? 1 and 8, negative 1 and negative 8, 2 and 4, and negative 2 and negative 4. Which pair of numbers do I have to pick? Well, I have to pick the pair of numbers that add up to give me negative 6. 1 and 8 add up to give me 9, so that's no good. Negative 1 and negative 8 add up to negative 9. This is no good. 2 and 4 add up to 6. That's no good. Negative 2 and negative 4 add up to negative 6. So this is the pair of numbers I want right here. So what I'm going to do is change the negative 6x into negative 2x minus 4x. Okay? So, similar process as before. So I leave my x squared here, minus 2x minus 4x plus 8, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Group the first two together with the last two. So I've got x squared minus 2x, common factor here. The first pair of numbers actually doesn't change from before. So you still factor this the same way that we factored the other ones. Take out an x. X times what gives me x squared. X times what gives me negative 2, so it's a negative 2. So I've got x times x minus 2. Now my third term here, as I mentioned, is a negative 4x. So when I take out my greatest common factor for the second pair of numbers here, if your third term's negative, always take out a negative greatest common factor. So since I've got 4 and 8 here, my common factor will be 4, and my third term is negative, so I'm actually going to write down negative 4 right here. Now, negative 4, be careful with your signs here. Negative 4 times what gives me negative 4x? A positive x. And negative 4 times what gives me a positive 8? A negative 2. And you notice that I do have the same common bracket here. If I had put a positive 4 here, the signs in this bracket would have been opposite of each other, so this would have been negative x plus 2, and my brackets wouldn't have been exactly the same. There is a way that you can deal with that, but I just find it easier to just take out the negative common factor right there, so that now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Now I can see I've got my common factor of x minus 2. And then when I cover up the x minus 2, I've got x minus 4 as my other factor. And that's how you factor trinomials.